Last week, the challenge was to create something without using a brush. It was tricky at times, but it happened. It gave me some very textural abstract florals. The point is to give yourself the opportunity to let go of some control and let spontaneity happen. To add a new twist this week, I added in nature items, but still no brushes allowed. Are you up for the challenge? New videos are coming out every Tuesday, so make sure you click the QR code to be notified as soon as it's available. This week I've got my sketchbook ready with just some sketched rectangles instead of tape like last week. And I went out and collected nature items from around my yard. So flowers, leaves, like a piece of stump. I have no idea where that came from, but it might be interesting. I also limited my color palette and grabbed some mark making supplies that matched the paint. I'm just gonna scribble around to get a sense of composition with a Neocolor crayon. That's a light one, and I have a dark one as well. This is a Stabilo woody pencil. They're fun to play around with. Just adding some darks in to see where I might want to put the larger elements, and it could be completely different at the end. And that's okay. It just helps you get started. Let's try this stump first. I'm gonna put paint on it and use it as a stamp to see what happens. I don't know what it's gonna do. It just looked cool. Like, I don't know if it will do wood grain or whatever. Let's see. So some cool texture going on. It's not really the wood grain. I guess it's probably not thick enough. Like, the lines aren't thick enough to do that, but some cool textures. You never know what you're gonna get with nature. The colors I'm using are Golden Titan, Mars Pale, and Burnt Sienna. They're very natural earthy colors that are fun to play around with. The Burnt Sienna has kind of an orange tint to it that's really beautiful. Mixing them together gives a slightly lighter shade, and I think I'll see what the flower does when I stamp it into the paint and then onto the page. That is really cool. Textured, but you can also tell it's a flower. It's a good way to get a flower started in your artwork. I love that texture. It almost looks like saran wrap. That's another thing you can play around with. Grab a piece of plastic wrap from your kitchen, crumple it up, and stamp it. The problem with nature is you gotta pick dirt or little things out of your paint at times, but that's okay. Let's see what some of these leaves do. I'm gonna make a lighter shade of paint since I have a lot of dark going on. And I will stamp the leaf into the lighter paint. Let's see what happens. Okay. Some more cool effects. That one really looks like a leaf. Different textures. I really have no idea what happens when we're going to stamp these items on. That's where the letting go of control piece comes in. Now with the scraper, I'm just adding in a little solid color because the texture was getting to be a lot. If you have too much texture, it can be overwhelming. And so you may find you need to calm some areas down with a scraper or a palette knife. And then you can go back into it. So I'm using the stem of the leaf to make some marks and see what happens. So I'm adding texture back in, but I gave myself that resting place for my eyes to look at so I could continue. I'm gonna add in some more calm areas and just fill in the spaces that don't have anything yet. This is a really light value, so when I'm creating, I'm constantly thinking in my head how I can make contrasts and differences to make things more interesting. And so light and dark is one of the first contrasts I ever learned to play with. The lightness and darkness of something is the value, and changing up your values makes your work more interesting. And then also, as I'm doing this light and dark, I'm also covering up some of the texture. And so the difference between the textured areas and the smooth areas is another way to add in some contrast. As you think about these things, they start to become second nature when you've done hundreds and hundreds of paintings and filled many sketchbooks. You will find yourself looking for ways to add differences, whether it's this messy and smooth and light and dark, or thin lines and thick lines, or fine lines and messy areas next to each other. There's all kinds of ways to make differences. Here's another leaf I found out in the yard, seeing what it does when I stamp it. It's another interesting shape. Kind of looks like a different flower bloom. Even though it's leaves, it's kind of a cluster of leaves. And don't just stamp, see what happens when you smear it around. So that is making like a rose flower shape. And it almost looks like a brush mark. And then here's another contrast, the brush mark look against the messy textured stamp look. These are starting to come together. They need more detail, but I can see compositions in each one. The top left is a little weak at the moment. It doesn't have very many darks. It's kind of stuck in the middle there, but we'll see what we can do with that. These are some berries I found on a bush next to our house. So you know I like dots if you've been around here long, and so adding some dots into the mix here. So I don't know if the dark dots are doing much here, but for now we will go with it and see what happens. So the leaf I stamped with before, and now I'm trying to smear it around in different ways to see what I can get, and that is the darker paint, so that painting is a little more interesting now. As I spread it around, I can make more flower shapes, use the edges of your nature objects to see what kind of lines you can make. So that's a really cool textured line it made up in the top right. It's all these little details that make things so interesting to look at. Don't forget that using anything but a brush includes your fingers. And so I'm adding in some pretty close to white paint because I've got all of these dark and mid-tone areas, but I don't have any highlights. And you can see I'm kind of blending out some of the texture. It was a lot and it was distracting me. So you may like texture everywhere. I like a mix of texture and smooth areas, and so I'm just kind of covering up some spots that don't need so much. Your finger can be a very useful tool when adding paint. And my hands are almost always covered in some kind of paint. I wash them, but we'll be at the dinner table and someone will say, "What is on your hand?" I'm like, "It's paint. What else would it be?" So here's a Stabilo. I'm drawing it over some of the dry spots. It won't work very well on wet paint. So as you're working around, you can even have 2 sketchbook pages open if you want, so you have a lot of space to go back and forth, because you do have to wait for things to dry. Or you can use a blow dryer or a craft dryer to dry your stuff out so you can work quicker. So this woody pencil is really dark, so I'm adding in these darker spots again to add more contrast and detail, and you can see it's starting to look even more like a flower. It's still semi-abstract, but the extra detail just adds something when you look at that bottom left one compared to the top right. I'm starting to really like that one with the drawn in leaves that are light, the light peach over the light peach. I like subtle details like that. This white one, it's not really doing too much, but I tried. You can always experiment. Let's try something with this dark, see if dark in the upper left, like drawing around those dots, will do anything for this. I'm not sure that I actually like that. It might be a bit too much, but we'll just leave it there for now. All right, let's start doing something down here. It needs some kind of detail. Another way to let go of control, you can see I switched to my left hand. That is my non-dominant hand, which means my lines will not be very precise. They will be wobbly and jiggly and loose, and that's what I want. If I was trying to do it with my right hand, I might try to have control, and that would ruin the fun for me. I really don't like that corner. Let's see if this helps at all, but I think it's making it worse, honestly. We'll get to that again. Not sure what I'm gonna do there. The whole point of this is to stay curious. So I grabbed the Stabilo again, and I'm gonna see, all right, this could be a flower shape. Can I make it into one that looks even more like a flower? And honestly, at this point, it kind of looks like a thistle or something, with the leaves coming off the bottom and the middle bud coming out, or it could be a rosebud. It doesn't really matter what type of flower it is, it's just an abstract representation of one. If you read my email story, you know that the difference between control and curiosity is a key to creating. You can't have both. At least I don't. I can't have both. So it's either curiosity or control. And which one do you want in your creative practice? I want the curiosity, even though sometimes I do find myself trying to have control again. I really do prefer the curiosity. It's more fun, it's more free, it's more loose, it's more intuitive. But that control keeps trying to come back in at times. You have to watch out for it because it's sneaky. All right, let's see if we can add some more detail to this upper right one, kind of like the lower left. It already looks better just with a few lines on it. color in some areas with the lighter shade to add some more color. More color and more depth to the piece. And some more dots because I love them. I'm using my left hand again to draw these leaves because I wanted the lack of control. That was the whole point of this exercise for me. So I'm actually really liking that. The foliage lines over top the dots. I actually really like that one, where it's going. And here we go. All right, let's get rid of this mess because it was too much. Using my finger again, you can see the color blending through a little. That's because I used the Neocolor crayon, and that is water soluble, so when something wet touches it, the color will blend around. And another way to loosen your control over things. That is much better with it taken away. I'm sure I can add something back into it, but it was a bit much. And these are just my personal preferences. It's how I create. You may like a lot going on, and that's okay too. If you look up art, you will see it there's so many different ways to create, and some artists use a ton of texture everywhere. Some artists use a little bit and pair it with calmer areas. It just depends on you and your style and what you like. So let's see, making this one a little bit more floral. It just kind of looked like a blob until now. I don't know what I can do with it, but here's some leaves. And you can see I am drawing outside of my lines totally fine. It's a sketchbook. That was just a guideline because I knew I wanted to make 4. Again, this white one, I'm trying it again, but it's really not doing anything helpful. All right, so I like the top right one so far. And I like the flower in the bottom right. And the bottom left, there's something missing, but we'll see what we can do about that. Going back to the stem of my leaf to see what dots I can make, and look at that interesting shape. They're all turning out a little bit different, which is super cool. And I like that subtle dotted area instead of the big dots with the circles around it from before. This is much better. Sometimes all you need is just a different scale of something and it will work nicely. So yeah, I really like the top right and the bottom left, but the top right is probably my favorite. The top left is a little messy. I could probably keep working on that one. And the bottom right is also a bit messy, but this is what it is for now. Thanks for joining me today. I'm all about helping you grow your own creative practice full of peace, intention, and curious exploration. Find out more when you visit jenfletcherart.com. I'll see you soon.